And all of like microservices also, if you're coming from the backend world, you heard it, but this doesn't mean that you can't do, for example, microservices in mobile. You can do it. This is the beauty of architecture patterns. But if you want to go deeper in the, like, if you want to go deeper in the architectural approaches, what you need to keep in mind is you can follow the common ways of doing something in the respective platform. And for the mobile, it's mostly going around these four. Basically, the most common, at least for me, the architecture pattern that I have seen is layered architecture. This layered architecture is basically you just like split your application into different layers like UI layer, data layer, domain layer, so on and so forth, and actually have a communication between these layers. And all of these layers are basically, they have an abstraction over them, so you will not, you will be able to separate these approaches. So this way you can have actually some building block approach to create some things. On the other hand, event-driven is basically you have events, you have event emitters, consumers, and you have channels to change, send the events. So you can queue those events, and according to what happened in the event, you can just actually make an action out of it. When we talk about like reactive architecture, actually this is one of the most suitable things for Flutter, because Flutter is using Dart, and Dart is a reactive language. And with the reactive architecture, basically you can follow the reactive programming paradigms and actually have some approach, like for example, using different software architecture patterns like observable patterns and so on to use streams and have and have these information passed in between the concerns. Lastly, like monolithic application is one of the things that is like super simple, but at the same time, it is not scaling very well. And everything that you have within the application is not split into anything. So it's in one place. So you can start fast, but at the end, it will give you hard times. But this is also something that is followed between the mobile applications out there. For me, my favorite is layered, but one thing that you need to keep in mind, especially during this talk, is all the opinions obviously are my opinions. If you want to have your opinion, just listen to what I say before and try to grasp one or two things make sense to you and actually pick the one that is suitable for you the most. But how to pick an architecture pattern, right? Actually, it goes into like multiple steps. Like, first of all, your architecture pattern should give at least the basis information and analysis about how you built your application. And it should provide you some reusable elements and decisions, so you can actually pass this information and say, look, there's a pattern here, and you can actually use it. And it should not only support the early design and decisions, but it should also be maintainable. So it should be giving you a chance to have a scalable application in the future. And also, since you're in the business field, it needs to fulfill the business needs, and maybe even easy to explain it to the stakeholders. And with this perfect architecture pattern for your case, you will lower the risk, and you will actually reduce the cost that you spend. By cost, I mean the human time that you spend on something. So when you decide on something, if you think about these and see that, okay, for me, for example, okay, reactive pattern somehow gives, then you pick that one, and this is how it works. Now that we learn about how or what software architecture is and how it works, now we will talk about state and state management. What is state is basically, state is an object that representing the part of the app. So it's not the part of the app only, but actually it is some kind of an information that you can have alongside the app as well. So you can have, for example, authentication data. This is your state about authentication through the app, but you can have an information in some text in the screen that is a state for that text in that screen. So this is basically an information that you have within the app, either in a part of it or along the whole app. What I mean with this, there are two types of state actually out there. One of them is app state, which is, as I said, like something that affected the whole app and needs to be passed through the app. And the other one is called ephemeral state or local state, whatever you want to call, that is affecting the state of the widget that you have on the either like on the screen or on some matter. It doesn't have to be on the screen, and that is affecting only that part of the widget. So now that we have a rough understanding about what is a state, and it's actually a self-explanatory word, but now that we know what's going on, what is state management? Like, we know state, but why do we need to manage it, right? Like, first of all, think about it. You have a lot of states, and we know that widgets are immutable. So you can't technically change them. But for changing them, we are given a chance to use a system called state. And this state is actually mutable. But for managing multiple states within the app and like passing down this information to the different states in that widget tree, you need something called state management, because you need to manage this state in a way that everyone can use it either along the web or basically when it needs to change, you need to have a chance to actually update the information that you need. So that's why there's a system called state management. But how to pick a state management approach, right? How it works. I will give you the direct answer right now. The rule of thumb is do whatever is less awkward. As I'm saying from the beginning, do whatever works for you the best. By the way, this Dan Abramov guy is one of the React people. Like, he's super famous in the React world, and this sentence from him is, I think, the best sentence that I've seen for a while. Like, as I said, if you want to pick something, do whatever seems most familiar to you. Of course, with your team and etc. But you need to understand that there's no point of reinventing the wheel. And that's why Flutter gives you a lot of different state management options. So let's go through all of them, at least like most famous of them at this point, and learn about how they work. So basically, as I said, in Flutter, your building blocks are called widgets, and these widgets are immutable. So you need to have a mutable system, and that's why you have something called stateful widget. It is immutable, that's for sure, but the state object that it creates inside when you create a stateful widget is mutable. So when you change the state, it recreates the widget tree belongs to it. You can think it that simple. All the operational or performance stuff is happening in the Flutter's SDK side, so you don't need to worry about it. And after the state has changed, all the subscribers of it, as I said, change themselves. And this is how it works. It's quite straightforward. But what are the down points of it, right? It seems like quite straightforward. You use one method and you just say set state. So that's why for deciding this, I have created this some kind of mark system. It's like there are 5 points. If it checks the box, then it's fine. If it doesn't, then I explain why. But instead, I will explain everything. By the way, I ripped this system from Brian's talk from DroidCon Berlin. It's like, I think it's perfect. It will be really useful for our case as well. So let's talk about it. As we saw, like, stateful widget is quite easy to learn, right? Right? I mean, like, you use just one method when something changes. It's nice. But is it scalable? So what we mean by scalable, changing the state of one widget in the local level, stateful widget might work. This is fine. You can use it, especially if your widget tree is not depth and you don't need to take care about the recreation of widget trees. That's like amazing to use. But if you want to pass down this information through the widget tree, you need to always send this data as a dependency, which is like chaining the dependencies. It's not something that we would like to do. That's why we have dependency injection approaches to handle these for us, to actually have a clearer and testable approaches. And there's a microphone. Cool. So that's why it's not scalable, because we want to be able to pass down this information without having super extra efforts. Is it platform independent? What I mean by this, platform independent means if you write pure Dart code, can you able to achieve this? The answer is no, because this is highly dependent on the Flutter's ecosystem. So for example, if you want to use this, you can't use it in Angular Dart. Is it easy to implement? Yes, because you just use one simple method to call and that's it. And as I say, easy to learn and easy to implement are two different things for me, and this is my marking mechanism. So if you find it confusing, I'm sorry. And lastly, I want to talk about testability. Testability is not a problem in Flutter. So like you will see that testability will be checked in all of the approaches, because you have three different ways of testing something. You have unit testing, you have instrumented test, and you have widget test. So if you have something platform dependent, you can use widget test and instrumented test to basically create and mock the behavior. If it's pure Dart, you already have the unit testing approach, so you can use it directly. It's perfect. Cool. But as I said, this wasn't enough, and Flutter team knew it as well. And that's why they had something called inherited widget and inherited model. It is basically a widget that can be used to push down information in the widget tree. And it would just, so the child widget will ask for a certain type of information, and the inherited widget will bring back the first information that is available in the widget tree. And when this changes, the consumer of this widget will recreate itself, and it will actually show the related information. But for this one, you need to implement some method like this, which is quite long. And that's why there is a common pattern. So let me show you that. We'll come back to this. See, you have something called, like, for example, this frog color is an inherited widget. So basically it has a color field. And when there is a change in the color, it will notify the child. And the pattern or the the approach that I was talking about is this off static method. I'm sure if you have developed with Flutter, you have seen like theme.off or media query.off. So basically, with this approach, you don't need to write this long method all the time. You just need to call frogcolor.off with the context, and context is basically your address in the widget tree, and it will go up in the widget tree to get the first available information with the frog color and bring back to you. So this is how it works. So when we go back to the knotting mechanism, we can see that yes, it is somehow easy to learn. Like we can understand how inherited widget works. And now we fix the problem to pass down information in the widget tree. So that is also another win for us. But still, this is part of the platform. This is part of the Flutter. This is not a must, but I just want to give you an option that you can have. Like if you want to make a website with Angular Dart and share some business logic, you can do it, but with this, it's not possible. Is it easy to implement? Unfortunately not. By easy to implement, what I mean is, as I said, like it requires so many extra work to do. Like this is just a simple frog color example, but when it gets more complex, it will get even more complex. You need to implement other things like inherited models and so on and so forth. And this is not the best approach. It is an approach, but it's not the best approach. And once more, testability is not a problem. Now we will talk about the most famous thing, provider. But before we go around, I want to talk about scope model. Scope model is basically created by Brian Egan, and it was in the Fuchsia code base. Fuchsia is the operating system, new operating system from Google that they're working on right now. And it's like, if you haven't heard about it, please check it out. That's why we have even higher hopes for Flutter. And it's basically a wraparound inherited widget to make things easier for you. But scope model had some also problems because scope model itself was not so easy to, like there were some points that you needed to depend on a certain type of an object. You can't just pass down any information that you want. And this was obvious, and that's why Remy started to work on a new package called Provider. Basically, it's a scope model on steroids, we might say. And it's a mixture of dependency injection and state management. So you can, for example, use Provider to do the dependency injection and have a state management approach in a different way, but it's totally up to you. Actually, there's a like really funny story behind it. Like when Remy had already implemented this, Google started to work on a project called Provide. And like Remy saw this, and it was basically what he had done. He was like, so why are you doing this? I already have this, so just use it. And that is why Provider is also actively used by Google. So Googles are also making a contribution in it. So it's quite cool. But like, how do we use it, or what are the main things? So there are like three types of usages. Basically, first of one, again, seems like quite straightforward, right? It's like provider.off. Off is like from the static method. So you just give a type of the object. As you see, it's a generic type. So you can give any object to it, and basically it will bring back the first available information in the widget tree. And second thing is something called consumer. Consumer is working with the builder pattern. This builder pattern is basically listening to the type of the object behind the scenes, and it's actually sorry, let's go back. It's actually working like this, but it is giving you a builder approach. So whenever it is changed, your builder is called again. So this is more secure than this, because this is just a call to retrieve the information, but this always listens to the information out there. About the selector, sometimes you don't want to recreate your widget all the time, because like each time that is changed, it is like giving you a pain. So for this, you can have a selector. What selector does is you can give it a condition, and you can say, if this condition is true, do not recreate the widget tree. It also accepts a child, so you can even like have some parts that are not recreated again like it is in animated builder. So with this selector, you can actually have a better approach and better performance. So let's talk about mainly provider here. So provider is easy to learn. There's a like really nice documentation. One thing I really like about Remy is he writes a lot of documentation. It is scalable. It makes a lot of things easier. It is right now platform independent, but I saw that he's rewriting provider right now to make it platform independent, which will be crazy. So maybe we can check it out in the future. And provider is easy to implement. As I said, like there are three concepts that you need to go around. And once you learn them, you can actually have a really nice approach. And again, testability is not a problem at all. So Redux is for me the bad boy of this data management, because for me I only used it in my first project and I had the worst experience with it, because for me Redux was, I don't know why, but it was hard to implement. But if you're coming from web world, I'm sure that you already use like Redux, and knowing that you have this option, I think is quite useful. So Redux is basically an architecture pattern that is giving you a chance to have a unidirectional data flow. How it works is like quite straightforward. First, there is a store, and store holds the state information. And everything happens, every event happens is an action. An action is dispatched in a reducer. And when the reducer updates the store, I mean your state, then your state is recreating the view. This is how things work. Like there is some kind of a circle behavior, and you have the store is waiting for changes in the reducer, and action changes the reducer says that, okay, I have changed to the store, and you have an option to actually update the view. Good thing about Redux is there is a Flutter package as well, but there is a Dart package which can be used as a platform independent approach, which is quite nice. So you can use it in Angular, Dart, or whatever approach you have. Why did I say it's not easy to learn? Because it wasn't easy to learn for me. It doesn't mean that it should be hard to learn for you as well, but it wasn't easy to learn for me because it was my first project. Redux was a bit sloppily implemented in the project, so that's why I had some hard times to learn. It is scalable. You can pass down any information or like any state in any place. Once you learn it, the logic is quite simple again. Like you need to understand how the action stores and reducers work, and all of a sudden you can implement it. So after you learn it, implementation is quite straightforward, and testability is not a problem. You have the pure Dart approach. You can have unit testing with mocking, but that's working perfectly fine. I want to talk about Mobix and Block in the last two. So Mobix is the state management library. Again, if you're coming from web, that you are probably aware of it. It uses the reactive approach and takes advantage of Dart's reactive paradigms, which is quite amazing. Basically, it works in three different concepts. It works on three different concepts: observables, actions, and reactions. And yeah, like that version is developed by another GDE, Pavan Podila. But yeah, right now it works quite nice, and it's also open source. You can check it out. So basically, we talked about like observables, actions, and reactions. Observables are basically the values that you can observe. Actions are like in Redux. Actions are the operations happening in your widget or in your application. And reaction is basically the listening part happening in your application. But you would ask, why do we have observers? Actually, Mobex has also a Flutter package to make things easier. So you can have like consumer, you can have a listening to variables, and when it's recreated, you can actually have a builder method to take care of it. And that's why you have an observer here. This observer is listening to observable, and when this observable changes after an action, it just updates the value. So for me, Mobex checked out all the necessary boxes. It was easy to learn. There's a nice documentation around it. It is scalable. You can actually put this into different architecture patterns. It's in the platform independent. It was easy to implement, and it is testable. Lastly, I want to talk about the block. Block was, I think, the most misunderstood concept of Flutter, because block and Rx, like I mean, as I said, Dart is already a reactive language. You don't need RX, but if you know RX, there is a package for RX Dart, and you can just use it to have a simpler approach. This was so easy for me because I knew RX Java, and coming to RX Dart, knowing the keywords helped me a lot. And basically, business logic components is like actually having MVVM around everywhere. So you have a business logic doing your operations and passing down the information via using streams. It sounds quite nice. And but this approach was super complicated for a lot of beginners, and Flutter team actually wanted to just give an approach in the beginning that people can use, because they were using block for passing down, no, sorry, sharing information between Angular Dart and Flutter app. And they were like sharing like 60-70% of the business logic between the platforms, which was crazy. So that's why they were actually encouraging this, but even they admit that this was overly complicated. So that's why, for the favor of provider, this is somehow getting lost. But if you know what you're doing, block is, I think, an ultimate thing that you can do. There's also a Flutter block package that is somehow independent from this, but you can actually have the block approach with that as well by simply stuff by using the listeners and builders and so on and so forth. And one more time, it wasn't easy to learn for a lot of people here. So that's why it's not easy to learn. It is scalable, it is platform independent. As I said, like AdWords app, and like there are some open source projects that use it directly in different like Angular Dart and Dart projects. It is easy to implement, yes. After you learn it, the logic is quite straightforward, but learning is not easy. And testability is directly there. Like you can use, again, unit testing to be able to test out what you have. Cool. Now that we learned, let's do a combination of these informations. Pick an architecture pattern and state management. For the architecture pattern, I use layer pattern because layer pattern is one of the most common ones, and I think because of the like separation here, I really like it, and you can have some decent understanding between the layers. Like I just gave like three informative layers here. You have UI layer here, which is representing only your UI. Domain layer here, domain layer is just doing your operations here, and data layer is providing the data here. You can use this layered approach with blocks. For example, you can have streams in between the layers here, and you can just pass down information. But in this example, we are going to be using MobX. So in here, we will have widgets for our layer. Domain will be basically our operations happening, and repository layer will be our data layer. One more time explaining, UI layer is and should only keep the UI related things. It should not do any operation. It just shows the information that is there. For the sake of it, I decided to use counterexample because counterexample is the most common example out there, and seeing that would also give you a familiarity. We have a stateful widget here. We don't have to have stateful widget here, but as I said, I didn't want to change a lot of stuff. I just got the stateful widget here. And when you, as I said, when you create the project, you will see something like this here. Just ignore this for a while. I will explain, but let's focus here. You will have an app bar, and you will have a floating action button. And you will have a body here that is showing this center text. Just a second. Okay. And if you see it here, you have a center text here with some information to be shown. So let's go back. The counter will be our class to make these operations for us. And this counter will hold all the information, and this will be our domain layer, which will be doing only the, as I said, operations for us. So counter has an increment method to do the incrementation here, and counter also has a value. It's an observable value, which is listened by an observer. And this observer comes from, as I said, MobX's Flutter package. And we have talked about this. The domain layer will be used in MobX stores. Basically, store is the, like, first store is the logic that is there to keep your domain layer information, but it's not, sorry, only layered information, but it doesn't have to be domain layer. It can be used in data layer as well, or whatever you have. It will work as your business logic part, and it can be independent from the ecosystem, but since we are using observables here, I'm just using the Flutter MobX, but you don't have to use it. But how do we create a MobX store? So basically the store is creating an action here. This action is called increment. And increment is basically a function that is just increasing the value by 1. And the value here is an observable. And we just expose the value that needs that is listened here. So we are not like exposing everything here. All the operations and all the operative parts are independent from what user sees. So we have a nice abstraction here, but you must be asking, but Salih, you said MobX is easy to implement. Why do we make all of these bottleneck work? Actually, you don't need to, because MobX has a code generation system for you for your stores. You can take advantage of the annotations. So you will have a value which will be observing, which will be stating that this value is observable. If you have methods that are actions, you can say that this is an action. And after this, you can just get this abstract class and actually create another class with the abstract class by the generated code here as it's mixing. And if right now we don't have a data layer to provide us some information from an information point of view, for example, but if we had a background operation happening, we could have used the data layer, and this could have used the repository approach to basically pass down information to us. So let's make a wrap up and conclusion. Picking an architecture pattern and state management depends on your experience and your background. So you need to make a decision for yourself. Do not go for the hype. It doesn't mean the best for you. You need to decide what is best for you. You don't need to always go for the most complicated approach. If something works for you, just use it. You don't need to go overly complicated stuff. Think carefully and be aware that designing an architecture is hard. So you need to always seek for inputs and ask for feedback from either your peers or your teammates and so on and so forth. So always be aware of that. And like after you go through everything, I'm sure you will have the best approach. So we have talked about what software architecture is, talked about some patterns that are out there for mobile. Then we talked about what is state management approaches that we have in Flutter. Then we saw a brief example about layered pattern and MobX. And if you have any questions, just shoot it now or later on whenever you feel comfortable. I also left some resources here so you can follow up and understand how the others are using these approaches or how did I learn. Thank you for listening to me. And if you have any further questions, just reach out to me over Twitter or whatever you feel comfortable with. Thank you. And that's all.
Okay, so guys, if you have any questions, feel free to send it on our comment box. So Sally could actually answer it. And
I will stop my screen sharing now, so you can actually.
Um, Hi guys. There were some questions that was posted in the link that I sent you. I'll post it here so Sally could um, answer them. Thank you very much, Sally, for the presentation, by the way.
No worries, I'm happy if I could share some information.
Here's the first one. Is there any difference in repository layer and service layer? What are they?
I mean, like, I think, from my knowledge, they are basically acting like the same. So I can say that no, but I have never used service layer naming. So I think, like, from my knowledge, they are the same, but I can check it out later on.
All right.
Yeah.
So the second one is your layered pattern similar to clean architecture? Do you think clean architecture is overkill?
I think, like, we need to understand that architecture patterns combine everything and creates an architecture. So layered pattern is a way to be uh, able to achieve clean architecture. Uh, for me, there are a lot of different. Uh, let's put it this way. I think clean architecture, depending on your experience and your project, it is useful. But what I talked about was not the clean architecture. I just talked about layered pattern, which basically you split into the layers, because clean architecture doesn't mean that you just split into the layers. You need to make a lot of arrangements about how you pass down the information, because in the layered pattern, as you see, we have used also a lot of observable pattern approaches, but with the clean architecture, the messaging paradigm works in a different way. So to answer your question, my layered pattern was not the clean architecture. I don't think that with the right use case and right experience, clean architecture is an overkill. But for the sake of your experience, if you don't have the experience, there is no point for just jumping into the clean architecture, because clean architecture is something that is changing. So if you want to read it, just read the Uncle Bob's book, and whatever you read besides that will be basically your uh, problem. Sorry, will be basically causing you some problem. So uh, there's no point of just uh, using it for the sake of using. That's all I can say.
All right. Um,
So,
okay. There's this one question that was voted to likes. So, is Redux good for state management? If I have knowledge of React Redux, is it in par with Mobex?
I mean, like, there is one thing that I'm going to say one more time. If you know Redux and if you have Redux experience, just use the Redux. There is no, like, this was mainly what I was saying. There is no point of reinventing the wheel. If you know something, if you want to use it, if you can use it, just use it there. And if you know React Redux, it's exactly working like the same, like no difference. Its only difference is just it is working in Dart. There is no other difference. So I think if you know Redux, you would be happy with Dart Redux or Flutter Redux. Mobex more or less actually works like, I mean, if you know Morex, it's the same with Mobex. If you don't know Mobex, but if you know Redux, but if you want to use Mobex, I think it's good as well, because you can just put the right things into the right spot and you can directly use it. So to sum up, is Redux good for state management? Yes, especially if you know React Redux, you will be like invocation, you will just use everything super simple. And for the MobX, if you want to do MobX, just do it. Cool.
Right. So, I guess, do we still have time for a couple more
I have
questions?
time, but it
All
depends
right.
on you. I have time. I can answer all the questions.
All right. I think I found a really good one here. Can I mix two or more state management in one application? What are your thoughts about this?
You can do it like, uh, okay, let's put it this way. You can, we talked about application can have a local state and the app state, right? For example, you can manage your app state with Flutter block, but for your local state, you can use even stateful widget. So sometimes even without realizing, you would be using two different state management approaches in one project. So first of all, is there a bad side of it? As long as you are careful about not mixing stuff a lot, so you need to be aware of something. If it's a local state that is not affecting so many things, and if you can somehow encapsulate it, then it's perfect. So you can know where it works and how it works. But I'm a person of, I love consistency. And if it's not like something super simple, like checking out the, for example, character count, and according to that, understand it, how would you, uh, how would you behave, then that is perfect. But okay, to answer your question, I can talk about it for 5 hours, so that's why I don't want to. So let's put it this way. You can use two different approaches, and if you're careful, it is not bad. You can actually take advantage of all the things that you need. For example, you can have a Redux uh, state management, and you can use provider for dependency injection. This is perfect. Like, it will not harm you at all. So there is no harm in it. You can also manage two different approaches in your layers. Like, for example, in your repository layer, you can just use MobX, and in the domain, I mean, you can pass this information with domain layer, from domain to data layer, sorry, data to domain layer, and from domain to UI, you can just pass down this information with block or Rx or whatever you want to call. So as I said, if you are careful about it, you can use whatever you want to use. This is, I can say what I can say. But personally, I would keep some things consistent for the sake of being careful.
Okay. So as you've said before, just use whatever is not awkward for you. All right.
Exactly.
All righty. Thank you very much, Sally. I think we will conclude the Q&A with that question. So I'll hand over to Z.
Okay, so we are not answering any more questions.
Uh,
Okay, cool. I'm seeing some questions. I will try to answer them somewhere. So, but yeah, anyway, yeah, thank
oh,
you. Thank you very much.
anyways, thank you very much, Sally, for the presentation and answering our questions. And
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for organizing this. It was really nice to be here and just sharing my knowledge with everybody. Thank you for listening.
all right,
Thank you,
that concludes
Sally.
our webinar. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Uh, okay, we will share more details of this after we have uploaded on YouTube. So for the people who were asking for the resource page, we will add those details in our YouTube video upload later. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you very much.